Alright folks, today I'm here to present to you another case of environmental storytelling in the Walking Dead universe. If you're unfamiliar with this series, environmental storytelling is a technique where a series of objects or bodies will be laid out in a way that conveys a story to the viewer without explicitly stating what that story is. In today's video, I'm going to be taking a closer look at the scene left behind at the gas station in The Walking Dead's very first scene, which has been requested quite a few times in the past. I'm going to structure this video by taking you through the story as it was first presented to us, before going back and attempting to piece together the evidence to figure out what exactly happened here. These videos aren't meant to convince you I'm right, just to start a conversation around a small topic in this franchise. We will probably never actually get answers to these questions anyway, so it's all just for fun in the end. If you have suggestions for future topics, let me know in the comments down below, and drop a sub to see more videos like this. Two months after the fall of society, Officer Rick Grimes would wake up from a coma to a living nightmare as the dead began to rise and walk the streets. But after acquiring a vehicle and weapons from his former police station, he would leave his newfound allies Morgan and Dwayne Jones behind in an attempt to reach Atlanta, believing his wife and son could still be alive in the city. But the road was long, and sooner rather than later, he was going to run out of fuel. So spotting a gas station sign in the distance, Rick would pull over, but what he would find left behind would shock him to the core. On the highway itself leading up to the station lies a variety of vehicles scattered, indicating quite the collision happened here as some semi-trucks and small cars are left overturned while others are burnt out. But moving past the initial carnage, Rick would set his eyes on a field of abandoned vehicles surrounding the gas station accompanied by multiple tents. Clearly this place was made as some sort of refugee camp when things went bad by those looking for fuel all the same, but now it lies rotting without a living soul in sight. Key items left scattered on the ground such as multiple laundry bins, coolers, and children's toys tell me this place had been running for at least a week or two following Monument Day, as some were attempting to create structure among the camp. I also noticed the cars are positioned in a way that make it seem almost like a maze in case the dead wandered by, but it's hard to tell. They could just as equally be randomly placed as copious survivors arrive looking for gas. Let me know what you think in the comments below. I believe this camp had quite the population during its time, as most would have nowhere to go after running out. We don't get a good look at the building itself in the show, but searching up the gas station used for filming, it seems quite spacious, so I can imagine the first to get stranded were held up inside, while later arrivals were forced to set up tents outside. But continuing along, Rick would discover this place hadn't seen its entire population flee when things went sideways, as we see a few rotting corpses left behind in some of the vehicles, which is very strange as walkers would have ripped them apart if they were responsible. Looking at these wounds, I initially thought they had been shot by a third party or someone within the camp, but while looking deeper, I saw a behind the scenes clip from the making of the first season that features a quick flash of these exact bodies springing up as walkers. Clearly this is a cutscene, and I can imagine it was because Darabont wanted the walker we will see shortly to be the first we as an audience experience, so its validity as evidence is definitely questionable, but I can't help but notice this walker that I thought was shot still has the head wound when turned, so it was there regardless of the scene being deleted or not. Perhaps these head wounds are from melee weapons that killed these individuals while they slept, but didn't penetrate the brain, so they now lie dormant as nothing was around to stimulate them. Alternatively, these bodies are just decomposing, and these aren't fatal wounds at all, but that would still leave the question of how they died while sitting in their cars, so I lean to the former explanation more. But regardless, Rick wasn't there to solve a mystery. He needed gas, but unfortunately, as he more than likely could have predicted looking at the vehicle graveyard, there was none left. Confirmed by a sign left behind by an individual seemingly attempting to deter more survivors from stopping at their camp. This place was a bust, and just left Rick with a sick feeling in his stomach, but for a moment, that would turn to hope, as while hearing the sounds of shuffling, he would look under the vehicles to see the slippers of what seemed to be a little girl walking along the other side, before picking up a stuffed bunny. This convinces Rick the girl is alive and needs help, but after calling out to her, He would be horrified to see she had been turned long before he arrived from what appears to have been a bite to the mouth, and had been wandering her place of death as we've seen many times before with the Darabont-era zombies that appear to remember echoes of who they once were. And despite temporarily freezing in fear, Rick would have the strength to put her down once charged, leaving him with nothing but trauma and still no fuel as he makes his way down the highway in hopes of finding gas once again. So this scene is actually quite a bit more mysterious than I initially believed going into this video. I can't imagine a multiple car collision could have happened any time after the first 3 or so days after the initial outbreak, so I believe this happened before the camp was fully settled. The biggest question mark by far are the bodies left behind. I'm gonna stick by my theory of these people being attacked while they slept with a melee weapon as, again, the cars are not heavily covered in blood as we would see given a walker attack, and there's no real other indication of death. The little girl walker, who, fun fact, is actually named Summer, is seen in pajamas, so to me, this reaffirms whatever happened here happened early or at night. I'm now gonna attempt to piece together a story as to what happened here, but again, I'm just theorizing based on what I've noticed, so it's entirely possible I could have misinterpreted or missed some evidence altogether. But like always, that's where you guys come in. Let me know what you think happened here in the comments down below. When the dead began to walk, many scared civilians attempted to flee the big cities, with most getting caught and eaten by walkers in traffic jams. But those who did get away didn't have it much better, as this plague wasn't isolated to metropolitan areas. It was everywhere. So traveling as far as they could, most would eventually begin to run out of fuel and seek out gas stations. Any source of fuel would have led to heavy traffic in the early days, and with cold bodies wandering the streets, many vehicles would crash attempting to avoid them, leading to quite the accidents as cars and semi-trucks would be flipped and burnt in the chaos, just as we see in the intersection at our featured fuel station. It's a little unbelievable that every single one of these cars seen abandoned just happened to run on empty right when they arrived, so it can be assumed some had doubled back when no other stations were in sight, or ran out while stuck in the lines. The first to arrive would occupy the inside of the station, believing they had a decent place to ride this thing out. But when more and more vehicles began to arrive and become stranded all the same, those already there would have no choice but to allow the scared survivors to set up camp on the outside. And despite putting up no gas signs to deter them, they kept arriving, leading to quite the population with little protection. The best they could really do at this point was keep watch and create a maze with the vehicles just in case one of these walkers wandered in. And as time went on, they were able to create a little bit of structure despite the mayhem, but as food and water became scarce over this time, things within the camp would begin to grow tense. We've seen how volatile the average person can be in a time of crisis many times before, so despite the camp housing children and families, some would begin to act out in desperation. Those who still held supplies would grow paranoid as all eyes were now on them, securing what they had inside their vehicles as they slept right by it for protection. But they never believed these people would sink to the point of harming them for what they had. They thought they just wanted to steal from them. So despite the paranoia in that department, they believed the camp was still civilized enough to sleep with their windows open, as the Georgian summer heat would surely kill them if walkers didn't. But this would prove to be a fatal mistake anyway, as they greatly underestimated how desperate the others were. It's entirely possible it was those who first occupied the station who developed animosity for those doing better outside, or just a random alliance of few who occupied the camp. But the survivors who still held food and water would be stricken in the head while they slept with blunt objects, before getting robbed by the perpetrators. But being so early on in the timeline, not all were privy enough to destroy the brain, or maybe they still thought only bites turned you. So while said perpetrators began collecting all the supplies they could, some of the victims would begin to turn and wreak havoc among the camp. Even children weren't spared as the dead flooded into the tents, and by sunrise, most within had either died from blunt wound trauma, walkers, or managed to flee into the wasteland, stuffing their hands with as much stolen supplies as possible, while accidentally scattering the rest across the grass in the chaos. But those who turned would remain wandering the site of their death, rotting in a graveyard they naively believed was safe. Now, is this interpretation perfect? No, not at all. But that's the fun of making these videos. I love to see if you guys agree with me or not, and hear your interpretations in the comments down below. It's a pretty mysterious scene when you actually look at the details with very few answers, so pretty much any theory is plausible. In the end, it doesn't really matter what happened here, as the scene is meant to serve as a reminder of the horrors in this world for Rick, and introduce us to the dark content to come. But these detailed backgrounds are what make this world feel lived in, and most importantly, scary. But that's gonna do it for me today, folks. If you enjoyed this video, I'd greatly appreciate it if you hit that like button, and drop a sub as well to see more. Thanks so much for watching.